So you can probably tell by the way I'm dressed that the weather is starting to change here. Garage door ain't open. Kind of chilly out, but the workbench tells a story. I've been pretty busy. So the last few weeks I've been working on the plumbing of the engine. So that includes coolant lines, transmission, oil cooler lines, power steering circuits. Let's go take a look, see how it turned out, or how it's turning out. So, been working on the plumbing. So you can see here we got the intercooler with the secondary cooler mounted in front of it. But what I'm going to cover here is all that plumbing. I'll get to this later, but this is the reservoir for the power steering, and I'll cover all that later. And another thing you might notice is that there's a battery tray up here. I opted to put a battery tray up there so I can get one battery in. I don't even know if I'll use it all the time once this rig is on the road, but for starting and testing for leaks and all that stuff, it's just going to be easier for me to have a battery up here. Because I had said earlier that I might put two huge batteries out and back, but I don't have the wire for that, and I'm running out of time. So what we got going on here is the secondary transmission cooler. I'm going to call it secondary because there's actually two oil coolers on here. Heat destroys transmissions, so they, I've been reading is keep that oil cool. So I'll start at the transmission and work my way forward and describe exactly what's going on here. So everything is plumbed in stainless braided hose and using just regular AN fittings. And this is not complete here because I got the wrong fitting, but we have the transmission oil out to cooler and return lines there. There'll be an elbow here that will get it around the frame, and then that's routed up through the wheel well. And hang on a second. And then those are routed to the first cooler. I'm going to call it the primary cooler. Right there, if you can see, it's that black box. So what that is that is a heat exchanger, and that came right off the bus. And there is engine coolant circulating through it. The the transmission oil goes to that, goes through the exchanger in there, and then exits out the front and goes to this valve. So what that valve is a thermostatic valve that opens up at 180 degrees. So what happens is when the engine oil is below 180 degrees, it just routes it back to the transmission. So as long as that heat exchanger can keep up cooling it, it doesn't even go through the secondary cooler in front of the charge air cooler. It just routes it back to the transmission. But once it gets up to 180 degrees and over, that valve opens up, and now transmission oil flows through the secondary cooler and back to the transmission. So it's kind of a passive system. There's no electronics or nothing, no fans. So that should cover that. Also, what I got going on here is I got the air cleaner. You can kind of see it back there, and the intake tube to the turbo. And those are all reused bus parts. The two big silicone elbows that you see going to the turbo are reused from the bus. The pipe is reused from the bus, and then I just made a bracket that bolts up to the frame here. And along those lines of the engine coolant, you can see I got the engine coolant lines plumbed in. So we got all these silicone elbows, hard aluminum line. So it comes up from the radiator down there through the heat exchanger and then circulates back down and through to the engine. So those are getting close. And yeah, let's look at the power steering circuit now. Before we look at the steering, this is just another view of that valve. The thermostatic valve. It's got a bracket on there. And we get the lines that go to 10 AN fittings that are already on the secondary cooler. So that was pretty slick, pretty easy, and I just made up this front bracket here that mounts in front of the charge air cooler. There's plenty of room behind there. It's good and sturdy. Give it the old dad shake test there. That ain't going anywhere. So yeah, and then here's another view of the outfeed of that heat exchanger with the engine coolant going through it. And that's the outfeed, and that feeds that valve. And hopefully it does its thing there. That's that. So like I had said, we got the bulkhead fittings here that come from the reservoir, and then those pass through that bulkhead. And on the other side here, oh my god, there's where they pass through. Oh my god. So this is the supply line, and that goes to the suction side of the pump. And for the this is such a cluster here. And for the hydroboost and power steering, the high pressure side is supplied by this line right here that comes off of the pressure port of the pump that's on the back of the motor, or in the back of in there, and I might crawl in there and show you that. So here we got the this is the power steering pump. Doesn't look like your traditional pump like you would see in your Dodge or any other kind of passenger vehicle, but that's a supply line, that big fat one that goes to the suction side, and then the high pressure one is the one on the bottom, and that routes right to the pressure side of the power brakes. So this pump is rated for 1800 psi. It outputs 1800 psi. I actually changed that from what came with the engine, because I believe the one that was on the engine was well over 2000 psi, like in the 2200 psi range. So that was one of the first things I actually did, was look for a lower pressure one, because I'm pretty sure that these hydroboost systems on vehicles like this do not run at that high of a pressure. So I opted to get a little bit lower pressure one. I lucked out, found one, a new old stock on eBay, and it bolts right up to this engine. So that worked out pretty good. But that goes to the pressure side of the brake booster. and because of my ineptitude, I got the wrong fittings for the high pressure line. And that's a Russell performance piece, because that has got to be able to withstand 1800 psi. That's what the pump puts out. This is good for 2500 psi. The rest of the stainless lines I would consider low pressure, and they're sold as such. They're low pressure because that's what they are. We got the return coming off of the power brakes. That goes to a T over here, and then internally there's another high pressure line here. You can kind of see it. It's that rusty looking line there. That's continued high pressure, and that goes to the steering box. And then there's a return line that you can't see. Actually, I don't have it installed yet, but there's a return line that comes off the power steering box, and that goes to the other side of the T and goes back to the reservoir. So, I mean, it's kind of messy. I'll probably try to do some sort of management. I know this wiring is going to get all cleaned up. But maybe I'll try to manage that and make it just look a little bit tidy. But for now, it is what it is. I hate saying it is what it is. It's like you're admitting to defeat, but I'll try to do something with, to tidy that up. And that covers the hydroboost portion. And here's another look at some of this radiator plumbing. All this nice polished aluminum hard lines. It just turned out to be the best and the easiest way to configure all this custom shapes and sizes. And here we got the K&N filter. I don't know if that's going to be big enough, or if it has enough surface area. But I'll know right away, because I still have that indicator right there. Maybe my finger, maybe it'll focus. But there's that indicator right there, that if there's too much vacuum on the intake tract, it'll indicate that it's pulling too hard, essentially. So maybe if that does happen, I might have to get a bigger filter. But that's that. Another issue I had to address was the brake lines. And originally, right here is a distribution block, and that's splitting the front brakes and rear brakes, I believe. And then there's also a pressure switch in there that activates the brake lights. But that bracket that's in there, that was the original cross member underneath the 454. So I just chopped her up, because that's where that distribution block was mounted originally. So I just modified that so I could bolt it back up. Brake lines are hooked back up. They just need to be bled. Another thing I addressed was the throttle position sensor. I wasn't exactly thrilled on how it was behaving. It was originally mounted just kind of to this wood here, and it wasn't the greatest. But the problem that I saw was that it didn't activate or closely track, the actual throttle input. It was binding, and it was slow to react. So I added, I made this bracket and added a spring to it, just to help it in its travel, because it's pulled down by the throttle. That's not the issue. It was the opening up that was the issue, and this spring just gives it just enough tension to assist it with opening, so it actually tracks the throttle input way better. So that's that. But it's getting there. It's definitely starting to look like something. It's pretty wild. I mean, it actually looks kind of serious. I always thought this was going to be kind of had a roadkill theme, but that's way too nice to be roadkill. But like I said, trees are starting to get bare. It's windy as hell today. So yeah, that's where we'll leave that. Another thing I got mounted was this air dryer. Being this has an air compressor, it needs an air dryer, and it serves more in the purpose than just an air dryer. The air compressor, I need to get a compressor line to it, but essentially this, the pressure from the compressor gets fed into it. It dries the air, filters the air, and then routes it to tank. So I need to get a reservoir tank, and essentially that's a governor right there. So essentially how this works is once your pressure in the tank comes up to, I believe it's 120 psi, this switches, there's a valve in there, and then that unloads the compressor. There's a line that goes to the compressor, and then it also tees off to the input on here, where then it purges the system here. And then also there's a turbo cutoff valve in here. This is the turbo cutoff valve. So it isolates the air compressor to the air system, because the actual intake of the air compressor is fed by pressurized air from the turbo in the intake tract. So yeah, just got a little bit of plumbing to do here, and get myself a tank and a line to connect from here to the compressor, and I'll have compressed air. So one of the last bigger tasks that I need to complete is the TCM. So this is the controller for the transmission, and I need to build the wiring harness that connects to the transmission, to this, TPS, all that stuff. So I went to Jason at transmissiontuner.com, and he's a guru at this. He sent me out this DIY kit, essentially, because it's kind of a custom application. He's usually doing Fords or Chevys or whatever, you know, adapting Allison transmissions to Cummins in, you know, situations like that, where he can create, he makes the harness and it just bolts it in. Well, he doesn't, I don't think he's done one for a Honey RV, so it's pretty much, I got to create the wiring harness. So he sent along all this stuff. There's a power on relay that controls the power to the computer. All the fittings that I need to interface, all the wiring loom. There's cable, or, you know, loom protector, that plastic stuff, and friction tape, and all the wires I need. And I'll have to create a harness for that. I'll probably mount the TCM somewhere in the cab. I know you can mount this in the engine bay, but it's kind of exposed in the engine bay, and I'll give it a fighting chance and mount it inside the cab and pass the wiring harness through, well, it's just wood. It's a wood structure over the engine, so I'll mount it inside where it's clean and dry. So that's the last biggest project. So yeah, I'll get that done. Might be more of a winter project. Who knows? That wraps up what I got accomplished in the last few weeks. But now with the weather changing, my time is limited on what I can do outside. I mean, it's still pretty nice now, but Kim and I are going on vacation, leaving in a few days. And by the time we get back, I would imagine that these trees are going to be bald. There's I'm going to have to do yard work, and you know, I'm a little disappointed I didn't get it running. I was hoping to have it on the road by the end of this summer. I don't see that happening, but at the very least, my goal for the rest of the year is, as you can see, all that plumbing is just about done. So, you know, I can get the fluids back in it, coolant, transmission fluid, all that stuff, and at least fire up the engine and check for leaks. It is okay to run the engine with the transmission attached, even though the TCM isn't attached. It'll still be okay. But my goal would be to get the engine actually running and test for leaks. If I do, I'll post a video, but as of right now, the weather can change pretty quick. It is Wisconsin, and just this last week, it's went from summer to fall. I can't complain. The weather has been great up until this point. I mean, it was great. It really worked out in my favor. But we'll see what happens the rest of the year. Like I said, if I get it running, I'll post a video. So that's that. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned.